Good morning once again. You've got me as chair. This was my session to chair, just the previous session at last minute I had to step in. I have great pleasure to host and chair a panel that's entirely violence prevention through urban upgrading, which is a really, really interesting initiative that's been doing phenomenal work with Cape Town. It's multidisciplinary. They've been doing some really innovative things around standing and preventing violence in some of the most violent parts of Cape Town, the Western Cape. So without any further ado, I'd like to kind of kick the panel off. I'll let the presenters introduce themselves. And there's going to be one presentation, but there's going to be inputs from all the panel members, and then I look forward to quite a lively discussion afterwards. So Michael, if I can hand over to you.
Thank you very much, Guy. My name is Michael Krause, and I'm the team leader for the project Violence Prevention through Urban Upgrading. And if I look around, most of the people in the room do know me, and we know you.
Chris Giles. I'm responsible for social crime prevention components within the project.
I'm responsible for community participation in VPUU.
Iris Daniel, and I'm responsible for knowledge management.
I'm Catherine Young, and I'm responsible for situational, so planning and design.
Thank you. Michael, if you'd like to get proceedings underway.
Thank you. What we would like to show today is a little bit about the complexity of VPUU. We phrased the presentation, safety as a public good, negotiated spaces. As the name suggests, violence prevention through urban upgrading. There's a large component of urban design and a change of urban fabric in what we're trying to achieve. As you can see also from the first slide is that the multiple partnerships that tries to work with government and through government. And I think in the previous session, the previous panel, the Western Cape government has spoken about the violence prevention framework and the strategic outcome 5, particular 5.4, the whole society approach. And that's where we would like to see us as a program that sort of tries to implement and guide the way in the whole society approach in low-income neighborhoods. You can see this not only from my accent, but it's also in the logos. There's a couple of German organizations that co-fund the initiative. So it's an initiative that's co-funded by the German government, the provincial government, and the city of Cape Town. I would like to take you a little bit to an area, and most of you probably have seen that picture or the two slides that I'm showing now. This is a typical situation in a low-income neighborhood. For the engineers amongst you, it's quite easy to see that this is a stormwater detention pond. It's well managed and very clean, and it's clear that it will function in the rainy season. But as you can also see, it's not managed at all. And it's a very insecure pedestrian walkway. That's the major pedestrian walkway to the station in Khayelitsha. And it's actually a crime hotspot, as it came out in the community profile on the baseline survey that we did. And in 2004, we had in the whole of Khayelitsha 358 murders. If you look at a comparable study, or number that's internationally recognized, it's the murder rate per 100,000. We were at 75 murders per 100,000. This is the same area transformed in about 3 years. And you can see at the bottom diagonal going through it that the pedestrian walkway still functions as a pedestrian walkway, and the area also functions as a stormwater detention pond. Some of those playing fields in the center are lowered, so they are actually functional as a detention pond. The project also shows a number of projects and partnerships. You can see at the top right that green space and the little center next to it, that is the social responsibility program of FIFA, run by Grassroots Soccer, which is an NGO looking at youth and sport. And you can see on the left-hand side, you can see a little building, which we like to call an active box. That's sort of a safe guardhouse that guards pedestrian walkways in the neighborhood. And those are sort of some of the elements that are underlaid, obviously, by a strong participation with the community. And I think those two slides show the power of community participation and participatory approaches. So from our side, we try to positively occupy perceived dangerous spaces. We go into areas that's seen as hotspots, and then we try to change them physically, socially, and in terms of operation maintenance. And despite the name violence prevention through urban upgrading, if we look at what we're trying to achieve, is an improvement of the quality of life. Not so much as people might think, the murder rate, and people are obsessed with murder rates, particularly in South Africa. Our approach is to improve the quality of life, and there's a multitude, and I think Iris will talk about that. So at the moment, the impact in Khayelitsha, or in particular in Harare, is as a reduction of murder by 37%. Okay, what are we trying to present? We're trying to present a multi-sectoral approach to safety as a public good. Talk a little bit about the methodology, then Chris will talk about prevention from a social crime prevention perspective. Melikaya and Katie will talk about cohesion, and that's about community participation and spatial planning. I will talk a little bit about protection in the realm of management of public spaces, and Iris will talk about the research and linking to research institutions. The first slide about the strategy is we got a four-pronged strategy with the first element which we call the prevention strategy, that pretty much follows the World Health Organization life cycle approach or public health approach, from early childhood development through to young adults, and linking to income generating and economic development. And Chris will talk about that a little bit later. The next two is about cohesion, and that's borrowed primarily from Latin America, community-based mobilization of community-based social capital. I think there's a large area of deficiency, particularly here in South Africa, where we're trying to come up with a couple of new approaches. New approaches in participating in community development, but also linking communities to delivery of services. And a good example is the Extended Public Works program. And we're working very close with the Department of Community Safety in some of the elements here. And it's the management of spaces, so it's place management. The third element is the protection, besides prevention and cohesion, and that's your typical policing approach. That's your approach to spatial planning strategies, encapsulated in the elements of the crime prevention through environmental design, or SEPTED. And it's also the link to the legal and the justice department. In the earlier panel, we had a discussion also around the responsibilities, that both of them are primarily national responsibilities. And last not least is the linking to the research. Does it have an impact what we're doing? And that's the partnership approach with particular Cape Town-based universities. And again, the intention is to improve the quality of life. Good methodology is relatively simple. It's a logical approach, 5-step methodology. You need to know what is in the areas of your social compact, needs to be established, and you need to profile, or you need to have a baseline for that. It's a large upfront investment, which often public sector and projects don't have the time. We take the time because we feel it's important to have a strong community participation and a strong social compact, so it doesn't just become actionist programs. We then go into a planning and design process which links it back to the public sector, sort of coming up with a local area strategy which we call the community action plan, that's linked to the integrated development plan, which guides the resourcing of local government, or in the case of the provincial government, it's linking it to the strategic objectives and the various committees within provincial government. During the implementation, you create assets, either physical or non-physical assets. That's basically buildings and people development. One thing that's often underestimated in our context here in South Africa is the operation, maintenance, and management, particularly of projects, of approaches, but also of spaces. So that's a large emphasis of our program on that one. And then obviously moving on to monitoring and evaluation and quality assurance. We believe if one goes through a cycle like that, you can achieve sustainable neighborhoods. Just to give the example of a typical professional in this particular case, it would be an architect or an engineer or an urban designer. You usually get involved in a project cycle in planning, design, and implementation, but very seldom in the social compact and very seldom in actually the consequences of your design, which is the operation maintenance and the monitoring and evaluation. However, as a program, we're trying to cover the whole thing, and I think that is the whole society approach and the life cycle approach also of our project. Hence, we're looking at appropriateness of interventions, and also we see the whole program or programmatic approach as a process rather than a product, which often we are driven by product delivery. Just a good example is housing delivery, for instance. But I'm not going into housing. I'm handing over to Chris Giles, who will take us through the prevention.
Hi, good morning. So you'll recognize the top three squares from the matrix that Michael presented. And social crime prevention does cover or is involved in all 9 squares, but I'm going to speak to the top 3 for the purposes of this presentation. And then lastly, I just want to say a few words about our conceptual approach to an integrated intervention when the prevention doesn't work and youth gangs become a factor. So early childhood intervention. So for us, interrupting the cycle that ends with youth gangs has to start with early childhood education. I think you've heard from the Western Cape presentation this morning that that's in line with the policy. Michael mentioned the background survey, the baseline survey that was done in Monwabisi Park that I'll speak about. That survey gave us a very clear estimation of the number of children under 6 at 2,700. There was also an audit of ECD facilities in the area, and if full, they offered 447 places, which is approximately 20% of children under 6. So that's the starting point. And Kate and others will talk more about the consultation process, but after meeting with all the ECDs and local leadership, we developed a strategy whereby we would create public spaces that could act as supplementary teaching spaces linked to ECDs. And this is what we've been doing. They're called emtonjeni, which is a local word. And for those who speak Xhosa, it's to do with the water places that people used to gather at. And so they are built around the water taps. And I'm sure you'll see later that the water taps present design and infrastructure challenges as well. So there you see the linking between the social preventive work and the other aspects of the project. The numbers at the top are the numbers given to the taps. And there's some figures there. The main one I want you to look at is the number of children reached. We've estimated the number of preschool children in the 250 houses around the tap, and our goal is to reach 80% of those children. So to shift access to ECD from 20% to 80%. And in the first of those, which has been running for just over a year now, we estimate we've reached 70% of that target. So it seems to be a way in which you can achieve that level of access to ECD. The question really now is it good enough? Is it effective? And one of the things that we're going to be starting very soon is in conjunction with the DG Murray Trust to appoint a researcher trainer to evaluate the impact of this and to follow these children from very early age through to primary school to see are they beginning to succeed at school more than peers who don't have this opportunity. And Kate and others will talk more about the consultation process, but after meeting with all the ECDs and local leadership, we developed a strategy whereby we would create public spaces that could act as supplementary teaching spaces linked to ECDs. And this is what we've been doing. They're called emtonjeni, which is a local word. And for those who speak Xhosa, it's to do with the water places that people used to gather at. And so they are built around. We'd also like to see libraries taking on a role as resource hubs for ECDs. And there again, it's a question of how do libraries perceive their function? How are they designed? Can they offer institutional membership to ECDs, which would mean they'd have to stock perhaps fewer books, but many more copies of them. So there's a lot of those kinds of issues come to play. This is a picture of one of those spaces. This was a bit of a party. We were celebrating the completion of the space, but it gives you an idea of the immediate access and how through the activities parents are drawn to watching and that's an educational opportunity to address issues about the quality of parenting and to help them understand the value of ECD. Once we have some results, we will present them in pictorial, graphic form around these public spaces and begin an educational process about the value of ECD. The second component I want to speak to is about school-based interventions, and I'll be very brief. Some of them are school-based. Our major partner here is Love Life, and components of this are mapping the dangers within school grounds and on the way to school, so that we have a factual basis in terms of which to plan safety. Where the Metro Police have developed school resource officers or neighbourhood support officers and the local neighbourhood watchers, we're beginning to get them to patrol and work on a strategic way so that they can address the known risks to children. We're also involved with health protection, and this relates to the previous presentation about the alcohol risks, working with children in primary school and through senior school, to look at how do you protect your health, how do you avoid head injuries, and discussing with them what kind of relationship do they want to have with alcohol and drugs in their lives. On a community-based level, I've mentioned the use of the library and the membership of the library. It's something that we promote and encourage. We're involved in a lot of cultural and sporting activities, and you've heard quite a lot about that. And to go back to the Mtonjeni, we're using those also as a platform from which to reach older children, school-going children, adolescent children, with the purpose of re-engagement through the Love Life work, reproductive health protection, working with Mosaic. The alcohol harms prevention work is also being conducted from there. And these spaces are also one to have small sporting events or to recruit children to engage in them. One of the aspects of the project is the Social Development Fund, and I've highlighted in yellow here the projects that they're not all within Khayelitsha. They're certainly not all within Mondabizi Park that I'm talking about, but you can see there's a lot of opportunity there to support small activities. And this is a slide taken from the third Festival of Cultural Diversity, which we hold on an annual basis within Khayelitsha, and it's intended to promote understanding and tolerance across cultural divides. The third element I'll talk about is the employment income generating work with youth. Our primary issue here is to through the process of voluntarism, to engage the initiative of children, to promote cohesion between them so that the gang structures don't develop, and to equip them with employability skills. And I want to make particular reference to something that Gideon mentioned very briefly, which is the partnership between ourselves, Community Safety, and the Chrysalis Academy. For those who don't know, the Chrysalis Academy recruits children from the sorts of areas that have been identified in previous presentations here, the high-risk areas. And we have agreed that with the Department of Community Safety that they would allocate quotas to areas that have been identified as the particularly high-risk areas. And through the kind of work I've been talking about, we would engage with youngsters who'd be recruited into this program on the basis of need, vulnerability, and their willingness to engage positively in a long-term support process. So going forward, the next step would be after they graduate, they are placed with us on EPWP subsidies or payments, but there is a voluntary component retained throughout their earning through the EPWP process. And while they're with us, they are primarily working as safety volunteers, but they work shadow all our service providers. They can present one of the projects that I pointed to, the small projects that we can fund, to give them the opportunity to put forward proposals. And I think the presentation yesterday from the GTZ showed the power of that kind of positive engagement with youngsters. We also work with them on career planning and on job finding skills. So you can see that the intention is to offer a long-term partnership which links the kids to active citizenship, which links them to assisting in the securing of sustainable safety, and which gives them the work experience and the confidence to find or create work for themselves. The last thing I want to talk about is the conceptual framework that we think needs to be in place when this preventive work doesn't result in the disruption of the formation of gangs. And I don't think there's a time to go into this in detail. It's based on the cure violence model, which is a well-researched public health approach. The real point I want to make here is that at the moment, there is no agreed framework for intersectoral intervention in the issue of youth gang work. And until we have that, we are basically going to waste time. The key issues for us is to have a process of interrupting violence. And you might have heard yesterday the young man who spoke from Amandla made reference to the fact that we'd had a conversation about is it possible to work with the youth gang leaders. So that is one element of this model. The outreach work, I think we've heard quite a lot about that. The community mobilization is often lacking, but the critical problem is that the institutional arrangements for intersectoral collaboration are just not in place. And with Gideon, we want to make a strong commitment, and we're beginning to do it, to work on the basis of written MOUs. But the fact that you cannot get consistent attendance at a meeting from a State Department is a critical problem, that until we address that, we're not going to make much progress. And part of that is a culture of mutual accountability across State Departments and between State Departments and structures such as our own. And I think those are the kind of things that Gideon was pointing to in terms of fitness for change. So I will leave it there. What I've hoped to give you is a sense of programs aimed at the early stages of child's development, which will create supportive structures, engaging structures, structures helping them to succeed later, and the links between that work and some of the design and maintenance work that my colleagues will point to. Thank you.
Thanks so much.